Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Christina Kokoris. I'm the Director of Communications for Muse Collection. This is Richard Grossbard. He's the advisor. We're thrilled to be programming partners with AIPAD this year. So as you'll notice, we're sitting in the Muse Collection booth. And we'd love to invite you after this wonderful lecture to stick around and see the wonderful art we have on the walls. So with that, I will pass this off to Kristen Lubben, the Executive Director of the Magnum Foundation. Thank you.
There we go. Is that better? Much better? Closer. Close enough. Ooh, that's right up in there. Thank you so much for the introduction and for having us here among this beautiful work. I'm so thrilled to be joining the two of you in conversation today about this amazing exhibition. It's the new photo triennial at the Museum of the City of New York called New York Now, Home. And for those of you who haven't seen it yet, who are in town just for AIPAD, if you're from out of town, I highly suggest that you put it on your itinerary before you leave the city to get up to the Museum of the City of New York and see this exhibition. And for those of you who are in New York, you have, I think, until June, is that right? Oh, all summer. So we'll keep the party going. And there'll be more events in relation to the exhibition as well. So this is a new photo triennial that's been launched by the Museum of the City of New York, which is very exciting, I think, for the city to have a concentrated, focused triennial of photography again. And this one focuses on the theme of home, and it includes 33 artists, many of whom are exhibiting for the first time anywhere in this exhibition. So there's a lot of new voices, a lot of energy and excitement. And also a lot of interesting perspectives on the theme of home, kinship, community, family, and it's a very kind of embracing, expansive, crowded in the best possible way exhibition, a lot of voices and a lot of challenging ideas. So I'm really excited to talk about it with the two of you here today. Sean and Thea are the curators of the exhibition. Sean Corcoran is the curator of prints and photographs at the Museum of the City of New York. His exhibitions explore the visual landscape of the city and its inhabitants, including through a different lens, Stanley Kubrick photographs, Voice of the Village, Fred McDarrah photographs, and Brooklyn, the City Within, photographs by Alex Webb and Rebecca Norris Webb. And he also did the amazing exhibition City as Canvas, which is another area of expertise and interests of Sean's, which he leaves out of his photo bio, but I think is just as important, and is looking at graffiti and graffiti culture in the city, a really important exhibition. And joining Sean in the curatorial process of the exhibition is Thea Quiray Tagle, Associate Curator of the Brown Arts Institute and the David Winton Bell Gallery at Brown University. She's written extensively on photography, socially engaged art, and site-specific performance, curatorial ethics, which is something that I think we'll get into in our conversation today, hopefully, and Asian diasporic contemporary art. Thea's independent curatorial projects include Afterlife, which was at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco, as well as the Alice Gallery in Seattle, and of course that's just the tip of the iceberg for both of these curators who have very extensive and interesting backgrounds that I think came into play, and from different perspectives as well, into the rich mix that is this exhibition. Together, they're the co-curators of New York Now, Home, the inaugural Contemporary Photography Triennial at the Museum of the City of New York. So welcome, both of you. I'm really happy to be talking with you about this exhibition. And I wanted to start really with asking, maybe this one is for Sean, because I think starting with the decisions at the museum to launch a triennial and to launch a photography triennial. The Museum of the City of New York is not a medium-specific institution, so why is it not, any take on home? Why photography, and how those decisions started, especially given the timing of, COVID too, and so yeah, just curious how those discussions came about.
Sure. Well, certainly I have to say, because two of the curators are here in the audience, the ICP Triennial was certainly an inspiration. You were a curator, and Brian Wallace, who's here in the front row, was a curator. So we saw how they worked, and we thought, given our mission, the 5 boroughs of New York, that we wanted to engage people in contemporary photography. Why photography? Photography is certainly immediately accessible to people. They can immediately see the ways in which people live. And it's one of the best storytelling vehicles we have for the city. The museum is known by many as a historical institution. So we wanted to, our mission is to be the past, present, and considering the future of the city. So thinking of contemporary photography, contemporary issues in the city. We thought this was one of the best ways to explore that subject matter.
And the theme of home. I'm curious how that was selected on the part of the museum team, because as I understand it, and in the interest of full disclosure, I'll also say that I was a curatorial advisor to the exhibition, as was Brian Wallace, who's here with us today as well, who we might put on the spot also. And also Nicole Fleetwood, Chris Graves, and Michael Famagetti, and you can talk a little bit more about the curatorial process and how that came to be. But the theme of home, as I understand it, was discussed within the museum before the entire team came together. So I'm curious how it was selected and considered, and then also how it evolved and expanded in dialogue with Thea, with the artists that you began talking to, and the work that you were seeing, because my understanding is it sort of started in one place and it became this beautiful, expansive thing that you see on the walls now. So that's kind of a question for the two of you.
Yeah, I mean, initially, of course, home in the city is something that is ever present. It's an ever kind of effervescent subject matter for life in the city. So it was kind of a natural subject, and it's frankly a subject that is tackled by a lot of different institutions. So it was we thought it was a subject that was for the first iteration of the Triennial, kind of a logical subject matter for us. And even right away, we knew it was going to be more than just people portraits inside their home. We wanted it to be a bit more expansive and to kind of think about the broader ways in which we live and make home in the city. But frankly, bringing Thea into the mix and working with the advisory committee really expanded it in the most wonderful ways.
Hi, can folks hear me okay?
Yeah, okay.
Just wanted to say quickly, thank you, Kristen, for moderating. Thank you all for being here. I can speak a little bit to perhaps how the vision evolved. When I was brought into the project and as we began to work first with the advisory committee, again made up of the 5 industry luminaries, including yourself, as well as an open submission process. So Sean and the museum approached me last year. I come from academia. I know some of my own research, I think, is what brought me to your attention. I have a particular interest in housing justice, anti-eviction movements, and the ways that contemporary artists, including photographers, but not only photographers, utilize these media, as modes of organizing and activism. And I also have a particular interest in conceptual art, site-specific art that's thinking about place and space, as well as queer intimacy. So initially, some of our conversations were not thinking necessarily to look for artists, again, who were nominated through a 3-part process. Sean and myself had a host of artists that we were considering, again, working from documentary to conceptual photography, very established to much more emerging artists. The advisors also had short lists of artists that you wanted us to consider, and there was a very large pool of open call submissions that came through the website, which anyone could submit to, as long as the work was made roughly in the last 5 years or so, and which was shot in one of the 5 boroughs of New York. From that process, Sean and I had particular kinds of conversations. First, about thematically what we were interested in or what we thought would be important, either larger social issues such as immigration and housing rights policy, to some of the smaller textures of life, right? What were particular stories that we were noticing were not being covered either in the media or in other, other kinds of representations of home, or which were a bit overexposed in some ways, in particular narratives around COVID, right? That we wanted to offer another lens into. But that being said, when we had all of these submissions before us, quite a few assumptions perhaps that we had made to begin with were upended. And Can
you say more about that? I'm curious. Oh, it sounds like they need to decide how much to share here.
I know for me it was important to include particularly diverse representations of Asian Americans, ones that included Southeast Asian Americans, Muslim Americans, and other folks. And I joke, but it's not a joke, in particular around COVID era imagery from 2020, 2021 in particular. I asked the question after seeing, again, hundreds of submissions and meeting with particular artists, do Asian grannies live inside, right? There's so many pictures proliferating in the media and elsewhere about Asian American women, Korean American women, Chinese American women, in particular elderly women with masks on, selling vegetables outside. And while important, right, to highlight particular social issues of anti-Asian hate crimes in particular, and the ways that we've been scapegoated, Asian Americans, right, for COVID and other things, there weren't any images, perhaps 2, truly, in all of these submissions that featured Asian American women or any Asian American, East Asian American folks, right, in the most intimate spaces of home. And so again, in our conversations, this led to us searching for other artists and also having different kinds of conversations again about the kinds of work we wanted to see in the show.
Yeah, I mean, when we looked through all these submissions, it challenged us to say, okay, this is what we've seen, what is not here, and why isn't it here, and what is out there that we could potentially include.
And how did you decide, again, you're not a medium-specific institution, but you decided to do a photography triennial. Did you have conversations about what would be included within that? You know, how narrowly, what kind of a definition of what constitutes photography to include, or did you just say, we're going to include it, anything that has anything to do with photography?
Lens base was the kind of the parameters. So
yeah.
In fact, in the end, there's video, there's print media, zines. You know, it's kind of it's pretty expansive in terms of what we're including.
Right. Another thing I mentioned in my intro that I found really fascinating is that, you know, it's a very embracing and inclusive exhibition. And that was clearly a curatorial decision, right? You could have included fewer works, and it could have been sort of, you know, the sort of, you know, big names in New York photography and their take on home in the city. But you chose to go a different direction and include a lot of new names, not just from the open call, but other people that you met in other ways. And also, I know that you didn't just look at those lists and what came in, but you actually did studio visits with many, many, many photographers. And so that's sort of back to the, I guess, the curatorial ethics question. Is that part of, what were you trying to do when you made that decision, or did it just kind of evolve naturally given the theme?
I'll just start by saying, yeah, initially, you know, when you start out on a project, you think you know what it's going to be, and we were thinking, oh, it'll be maybe 12 to 16 artists, and you know they'll be able to have a dozen works. And really, I mean, as you both already said, we looked at so much great work. It became very clear very quickly that wasn't going to do it, and that we had to really expand the considerations. So I'll let you.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the curatorial process, again, we were given so many names, and you know, perhaps it would have been more time efficient in some ways to look at online portfolios and have very minimal studio visits. But I know, for Sean as well as for myself, I work primarily with emerging artists and contemporary artists. I work with a lot of students, and it's very important for me in general, right, to use the studio visit moment to spend time with artists who are developing their visual language, are developing the way they want to enter into not just commercial art spaces, but into larger dialogues, right, about what image making can do, in particular around questions of queer intimacy, homemaking, what the medium, right, needs to do to push forward, right, outside of even photography-specific conversations. So it was incredibly important for myself as well as for Sean to meet with many artists. I think we did not as many as we could have, but a lot, considering we both are full-time employed and working on other projects. I know I met with about 50 artists.
Yeah,
So
dozens easily.
Over a 2-month span to really, again, help shape the work. Many of the artists whose work is shown in the show maybe had been named or submitted, but we didn't necessarily choose the work that was initially submitted, right? We chose work that was very much under development or that were thesis projects or little nuggets of things that weren't yet fully developed. Maybe Sean can speak to some projects that were still unfolding.
I mean, there's cases where somebody brought something to us and maybe we were looking around on the website or whatever, and we were like, well, what is this? And I of course I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but it led us to completely different bodies of work, which ended up being perfect for what we were going for with the show.
And it was also helping facilitate, especially for emerging artists or mid-career artists, right, another expansion of the project. So for example, Alan Chin, who is a very established photographer, has been building this beautiful body of work that is working across 3 generations of photographers, right? His father, working with his own father's archive to new projects or new photos that he's making of his children. Initially, he wanted to talk about, show it as a slideshow perhaps, right? But what ends up happening as it was unfolding, again, was that it is presented salon style in the living room portion of the gallery. There's a book project, and hopefully, again, it will continue to expand. So it was exciting to give him that opportunity. For Cheryl Mukherjee, who has one of the largest installation-based works, she reworks her mother's matrimonial photographs. She's South Asian and is playing very much with the form of the arranged marriage kind of photography and ad language. She restages herself in these cheeky poses to repropose what a matrimonial photograph in the US in the 21st century could look like. While her images are fully staged with props and backgrounds and all of that, she'd not yet been given the opportunity to show an installation-based version of that. So it was really exciting to help her and to work with her to develop that installation. And again, to have this museum be the place where she could premiere that for the first time.
I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the theme and the ways that you discussed a little bit about how it evolved as you looked at work, but I'm also curious to hear your thoughts on the relationship between the theme and photography. In many ways, photography has this relationship to intimacy. It's a tool that's used within the home and within private spaces and within communities. And so in some ways, it feels like a natural fit with the theme. Is that something that was on your minds or shifted as you saw work? Were people surprising you in the ways that they were engaging with the language of photography around this theme?
Yeah, I mean, at its basis, like let's say somebody's work like Sally Davies, who you've probably seen scrolling through. In that case, there are people that are letting a photographer into their home, into their private space, and making their portrait. But then someone like Cheryl is making these incredibly intimate, but also strong, outwardly projecting pictures of herself. So she's really putting herself out there and her hopes and dreams and ambitions there on display. So let alone work by people like Irina Rozalski, where she's approaching people in public spaces where they're making home in Prospect Park. So there's a lot of different ways in which intimacy is kind of manifesting itself.
Yeah, for me, thinking about the longue durée of photographic history, my entry point into imagining or reimagining or looking for artists who are reimagining the domestic portrait actually came from, in part, my own research on the ways that the family photo has been used as an imperial tool of violence. So a bit different, perhaps, in the initial call or the pitch for home, right? But in particular with the 1898 Philippine-American War, right? And the ways that images of Filipino natives, right, taken from the islands, stolen from the islands, as well as from many other US possessions or European possessions, were shown in places like the St. Louis World's Fair, Coney Island, right down the train line, as a way of promoting, right, US imperialism of the islands because of how and why white domesticity, right, was seen as less savage, right, than the darker races. And so for me, actually looking at different ways that family photos have been reworked and reimagined, not just by artists of color, but other artists, right? To turn the camera lens back, to present themselves in a more defiant light, to not care about particular conventions of respectability, actually felt really important. And some of the artists, even if again, that's not their launching point, for me felt particularly interesting to see these moments of returning the gaze. Also from a very different standpoint, the club photo, the nightlife photo, the snapshot photo is also extremely exciting, right? What can be taken in a flash, taken in a moment of that ephemeral thing that gets lost. So Dean Majd, who's been featured in Aperture and other places but is not yet shown in the museum setting, his beautiful photos, which are printed so large, and he wanted them even larger, right? They're incredible in part because these are one-shot, 35 millimeter, flimsy 90s point and shoot. All the Gen Zs love it now, right? But he's been making this body of work for 7 years or so, amassing this incredible photo archive of his friends at parties and homes and other things, right? So again, a different kind of negotiation with domestic portraiture than I think might be expected.
Yeah. And I mean, this is something we talked a bit about, is the role of the photographer as advocate or intimately involved with their subject. It's not a, old school notion of removed documentary photographer, but someone who is working for their subjects as much as on their subjects.
Absolutely, that really comes through. I think the community-based spirit in the exhibition, and there's a lot of work that is activist-oriented. There's a lot of work that veers into social practice, and I'm curious to hear about that. And in some ways, I think, Thea, that this is, I'm sure, drawing on some of your background and your expertise and what you've brought to the table. Also, there's really an extraordinary centering of queer and trans stories and perspectives too. And I know with Sean there that would have happened anyway, but I feel like it would have, what you brought to it is there's a lot of layers and richness. This is drawing a lot on your past curatorial projects as well. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about that sort of expansive notion of photography.
I think you should talk about
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Kristen. I can speak a little bit actually to both of those questions, perhaps by using the example of Joanna Toro. Joanna Toro is an amazing photographer who has shot primarily, I shouldn't say shot primarily, she's been published primarily for her photojournalistic work, in particular around trans-Latina immigrant rights activists based in Queens and elsewhere. I initially found her work through that work, right, having kind of noticed in the Times coverage and other places, some of these beautiful portraits that she was making, classic black and white, editorial images of women on the streets, in activist spaces. When I went to her portfolio, right, what emerged really quickly is that she still promotes herself as a documentarian, but there were these beautiful dreamlike photographs of these same women, these trans Latina activists inside their homes, presenting themselves as they wanted to be seen, right? So in some images, they're mermaids, in fact. In other images, it's very soft focus, where they're in front of, their beautifully decorated homes with, the hundreds of gold gilded mirrors behind them. And what really struck me about these images was, one, the really participatory way. Again, these are activists who are very much used to being pictured outside, right? But the way that these very intimate portraits of them were another form of activism, right? What are trans Latino women fighting for? The very right to be safe, right? The very right to be seen, the very right to be alive, truly, right? And so these images were not being shown elsewhere, right? When, I even approached her to show those images, she's like, why do you want these? No one asks for these, right? Which showed to me the importance, again, of bringing this work forward, not to be the first to bring it out, but really, again, to highlight a different aspect of these women's lives and their stories. And Joanna herself, in terms of this activism question, works so collaboratively, these women, right, to stage these photographs. And some of them are quite intimate, full frontal, in fact, right? But you can very much see that care and that bridging of the distance. She's not a trans Latino woman herself, right? So there's been a lot of work there of community building, translation building between them, and the care itself, I think, is a form of visual activism, right? As other folks write and talk about it, that I think was really important to myself as well as to Sean to bring in photographers who had that kind of care in relation to their subjects and their friends and their community members.
In a little bit of a departure, I have a process question. So you decided, or the museum decided, to do an open call in addition to the curatorial research that you were doing, which is sort of an unusual take, but also a very kind of in the spirit of the exhibition, which is very open and embracing. It also reminded me, I was thinking this morning, Sean, of the exhibition that you and I did together a number of years ago, in the wake of Hurricane Sandy, which was also an open call by MCNY, which was at a different moment when it was, it was an open call with a different purpose in a way. It was about, this is a subject that was best documented by people who were right there and seeing it in their own backyards and documenting their own families. But I'm curious how that open call went. Yeah. Whether you turned up great work from it, whether you met people that you might do projects with in the future, how that fits into the curatorial process, since there's already such a massive process of narrowing, even from the work that you already know, to throw it open to the entire city of anyone who wants to submit work. How viable is that, and how do you actually look at all of this work?
It is viable. It is a lot of work. A lot of people from the public, when they submit, they just submit a personal picture or two, which doesn't ultimately quite fit what we're looking for, which is extended bodies of work, or even like maybe if they had submitted, a dozen or two pictures of their family, maybe during COVID or something like that, and it said something a little bit different than what we'd seen elsewhere, it might have made it, through more rounds. But the success is, I think there were, do you remember 3 or 4 photographers who submitted through, was it that many? Yeah, it was at least about a half dozen that actually are in the exhibition that submitted through the public call. In terms of process, we both looked at a lot of work, ended up with about maybe 20, 24 that we kept around and really considered for a while, and until we had looked through everything and things began to shake out a bit more. But it also really gave us a sense of what the public is thinking when you say home. So it also gives a different perspective from necessarily what we were thinking, and that became informative in its own way.
Did it help you think about those sections? Were there bodies of work that came in through the open call where maybe you weren't interested in the work itself, but it made you think, oh, right, we have nothing that addresses this area of the topic, and we need to do some more research? And do you want to say a little bit about what the sections are, too?
Maybe to the first part of your question, one fantastic contribution that came through the open call, which wasn't addressed with any of the other, mechanisms we had so far, were the images of Geraldine Shuckwit. She actually first began her projects in relation to photographs of unhoused folks around New York City through her Instagram, right, and submitted some of those Instagram posts. I think they were just screenshots, including the captions, right, because the captions had a lot about the stories of folks that she was meeting with. This was a bit difficult for us to the extent that, you know, we all have seen pictures, right, of unhoused people in New York City. We all know the different forms of exploitation that continues to happen, right, in terms of images of the unhoused and other marginalized communities around the city, around the globe. It very much, of course, is so important to include, right, as when we're talking about home and housing, right, the rights of the unhoused, and yet, right, nothing had been coming through, again, these pipelines that felt, right, that it was aligned with the kinds of curatorial ethics, and again, this collaborative, more collaborative ethos that we were hoping for. So with Geraldine's images, we had quite a few conversations with her. We had studio visits with her, really to get a sense from her as well about her relationship to folks, the problematics, right, of the image, her own, right, shifting relationships to the different folks that she has photographed over many years. And so with her, we ultimately, you know, worked with her to shape the particular story that's presented in the museum, which is of one person that she remains in relation to, that she had full consent of in terms of showing their images, Randy. And yeah, that felt like a really important inclusion and something that we could very much stand behind, ethically and otherwise, right, to address, again, this really important issue. Do you want to speak about the floor?
In terms of, I think one of the questions was about how we develop the categories. Well, the first and in a sense maybe the largest category is home as a haven, and it's about the idea of home as a potential safe place, but also a place that can be tenuous or non-existent, or a place that is unsafe, actually. And there are a few different examples of photographers in that section, including the little bit of work we did include around the pandemic, including where home becomes a place you're trapped in, potentially. And that's one is a work by Neil Kramer, which is being, somewhat humorous, taking a ridiculous, difficult situation and making something, lighthearted about it. And that's Neil was quarantining with his mother and his ex-wife in their apartment in Queens. And additionally, Chantal Heijnen, who was photographing her family quarantining, and then her son Lou Van Mellick, who was 6 years old at the time, taking pictures of back at his family and their kind of sojourns out to parks and things like that. But then also the idea of home as a haven. There's work by Sarah Bennett, who is photographing the homes of, or the rooms of often recently released or formerly incarcerated women after long-term prison sentences. And what's beautiful about those works is that Sarah is asking the women to kind of write a paragraph about where they are in their lives and what their experience is. And then trying to think, is there anybody else I should mention in terms of home as a haven? That the next section would be home is the body, and there is the using the tool of self-portraiture to kind of express home and homemaking, and there we included Dean, who you see here, where it's chosen kinship and taking pictures of oneself in place. Cheryl Mukherjee, there you see, and Nona Faustine, who is taking self-portraits on sites of either slavery, former places of slavery in New York City, or historic African American communities, and again taking ownership through self-portraiture of those places.
The other two sections in the show, Home is Chosen, again, emerged. All of these categories, actually, we didn't come into this process thinking that this is how it would shake out, right? We weren't looking for X number of images about X number of social issues. After the list became refined, it was really supposed to be down to 13, but we couldn't do it. We really couldn't do it. But when we settled on 33 or so, thinking about the different permutations, what felt really important also in the exhibition design, right, was that none of these categories were fixed, right, that there were clear sight lines between different quote-unquote sections, right, because, thinking intersectionally, right, yeah. There's so many issues, in particular around the queer artists. So Home is Chosen felt important categorically to make an assertion, not just for LGBTQ families or folks, right, that we can choose, but for everyone, we can choose the kinds of relations we are in. That being said, there are queer artists throughout, right, in these other areas. So the Home is Chosen section, again, foregrounds the experiences and family formations of LGBTQIA communities, such as the work by Layla Ann Stevens, who's the second youngest artist after our 6-year-old artist. She's finishing up school now and does quite a lot of work with youth educators, budding photographers as well. And then the last category is Home Crosses Borders, and so it is very much work that is addressing the rights of refugee and immigrant communities. A lot of, again, long-form, multi-year long projects by people like Ziza Cruz-Bacani and Cynthia Santos-Briones, very much telling these longer stories of the journey to making home and finding home for documented and undocumented immigrants and refugees in the city.
Soon.
I have one more, and then I'll get to Sally first. Will there be a next triennial, and what will the topic be? And will there be an open call for that as well? And what have you learned that you will carry over or do differently into the next one?
Yes, there definitely will be a next one in about 3 years.
Say about 3.
Yeah, about 3. Within a year of the 3, we don't know what the theme will be yet. We're open to suggestions if anyone wants to send them along. I figure we have 6 months or so to figure it out. I think we likely will have an open call again. I think what was learned the most was about the process and being completely open to what comes. Like, don't box yourself in. See what comes and go from there. It'll be expansive in your thinking. Have a good partner. Finding the right advisors, the right co-curator. I mean, someday I would love to actually just have 2 guest curators come in and do it. But finding the right people to work on it with the right attitude. But ultimately, we want these shows to be expressive of what is happening in photography in New York today, and 2, what New Yorkers are thinking, feeling, experiencing in the city today. And if we can get those 2 right on the right wavelength, then these exhibitions are going to be a success.
Yeah, well, I think this one nails it on both of those fronts. And it sounds like there's energy in the audience for questions, so maybe do we want to is there a mic for questions in the audience? Or shall I just I can listen to them and repeat them back?
Yeah.
And we can try to holler.
Okay.
So I don't know if it will carry. First of all, thank you, because this was so exciting, and I haven't seen it yet, but I plan to now. And I hope you would even consider doing, since I think you've made home such a rich topic, not necessarily shifting to another topic, but in 3 years, more or less, doing home again and see how this has inspired maybe new thinking in the 3 years. But my museological question is, did you consider, instead of definitional categories like home is haven, putting it as a question that leaves it more open as, is home a haven? For all of those, so that people are left more on edge rather than here in the house of the museum, we get these definitions.
In that one in particular, I think although there is not a question mark at the end of it, the work itself brings up that question. So it's, in a sense, implied. Do you agree?
Yes. And if folks didn't hear the question, it was around how might you leave the definitions more expansive, right, for these different categories so these things don't feel fixed. And for me, thinking curatorially, this is where the work, I'm speaking to professionals, you all know this, but the work of curators, so much of the gift that we can bring to shaping a group exhibition, this expansive and this large, frankly, is through the writing. And I hope that for folks who can spend time with the writing, either going to the museum, taking a quick picture, or having a copy of the catalog, which replicates the writing and in one section actually expands the writing quite a bit, that some of that nuance, right, and some of that indeterminacy becomes more clear. It felt incredibly important, actually, to not feel that any of these images are fixed, or even curatorially, right, that we were giving the definitive read on any of these works. And again, with the exhibition design, we went back and forth with Isometric, who are an incredible young design company.
Great exhibition design.
Yeah, the relationship between the work and their location in proximity to one another, I think, brings up that question mark you're asking about.
And again, thinking expansively architecturally, right? What won't make it feel claustrophobic for the visitors? What actually will allow for a different flow and a movement and a visual conversation to happen, even in excess of anything that we could possibly write or do to contain these images to one section, as it were.
I can't wait to see the exhibition. Thank you.
Yes, right here.
Yeah, I'm interested in this 6-year-old. Assuming that was gotten the ultimate call.
No, actually, well, the 6-year-old, it was okay. The question was, where did the 6-year-old come from?
Oh. Okay.
So the work from the 6-year-old was, I actually knew about it. His mother is a working photographer and does assignment work, but also does her own personal work. And she published a book with her son on this material in the Netherlands maybe a year or so ago, and I knew her, but I didn't know this particular work. It's again a case of like, work coming, a certain body of work coming to you, then in conversation something else comes out, and she said, Chantel said, I've been doing this work with my son throughout the pandemic. He just decided one day he was gonna, I was taking pictures of him and the family at home, and he decided to pick up the camera and started making his own pictures. And so yeah, it came through the mother and the work that they had done together.
So my question was, and my interest was the process of speaking with him. What was spoken about? What was his intention? And can you give us a little kind of information about who he is?
I love the work artistically. All of his photographs are taken from the back seat of the car and actually have this gorgeous movement to them. Things that we've seen so many times, New York City skyline, the cyclone at Coney Island, right? But actually taken from he must have had a booster seat, because I don't think I would look out that high if I was sitting in the back seat of a car. But you just get that little slice of a tinted window, the panorama of a cropped off thing. And again, I think he's shooting 35 millimeter. Yeah. Amazing that they're so clear. And they're just such a beautiful comparison to the photographs that she took of him, which are very chiaroscuro lighting, very much internal. He's always sleeping or looking very much in repose, kind of the classic cherubic blonde child inside. Yeah. Very beautiful. But compared to the dynamism, and they're, kind of stacked, there was a really beautiful arrangement of hers and his are much larger printed. Right. They're printed beautifully. It's just really exciting. Again, for me, just to look at it, it's really exciting, and then to think about it spatially, right? This conversation about how within these confines of something that we all experienced was incredible isolation during the deepest part of lockdowns, right? Is there still some sort of movement, some sort of presence, some sort of life from the backseat? It was beautiful.
Her photographs are domestic interiors by and large, and his are like these sojourns to parks and things like that, and there's a freedom and like just I don't want to wildness isn't quite right, but just a freedom to them, and they work beautifully against one another.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, I mean, this is obviously every 3 years, and so it's out of Mark's time. And obviously, it's an opportunity, I think, to sort of kind of bring focus to certain issues, kind of a call to action, so to speak, that's relevant to today as far as this time marker. And I'm just wondering, when you put together this exhibition, what those, obviously it's obviously curated in a certain way. I haven't been to the exhibition, and you've certainly touched on a lot of issues, but if you were to sort of sum that up, is there a way that you could say, we need to work on this, as a city, as a community? Is there something here that you're trying to sort of collectively bring attention to that we need to?
Maybe I'll repeat the question because I'm not sure that those in the back can hear. I think the question was that the Triennial offers kind of the snapshot look at the city, maybe even more so because it has this open call. And was there something that you as curators felt like this is what the city needs to be paying attention to or needs to work on?
I mean, housing in New York City is such a fraught issue. I mean, I think what we are trying to do is give voice to as many people and their experiences and concerns as possible, from someone like Ariana Faye Allensworth, who did a zine for, we republished a zine she created on the experience in NYCHA housing, to her work with the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project. I mean, just from the ability to have housing, we wanted to address that, and but then also beyond that, because obviously it is much more than that. How do we maintain our private spaces, but how do we share our public spaces? How do we live together because basically a lot of our public spaces are extended homes. We live together in these public spaces. So not just about how we make our home, but how we make our home together, even if we sometimes don't know each other.
Yeah, it's hard to sum up any one issue, right? Certainly, there's quite a few works, again, throughout the exhibition that speak very forcefully to the need for affordable and safe housing, public housing, and other sorts of state-supported housing. There's quite a few works that are asserting, in particular, the right of people to remain in multi-generational homes and communities that, they have been in for some time. So in the front entrance, we have very large format work by Elias Williams, shooting in the neighborhood that he grew up in, St. Albans, Queens. Right across from him is Roy Bazin, who has been making work around Mott Haven and the Bronx, two particular areas where redevelopment of the waterfront, in particular with Mott Haven, right, is currently threatening to displace a very large Black and Latinx community. So again, we wanted to foreground those particular community stories, while also, again, thinking expansively about home so people could realize what other issues that feel very far removed from their own life experience, such as trans rights legislation happening out there in the red states, right? Thinking very much how at home, right, the trans rights struggle here is so tied to the immigrant rights struggle here, is so tied to questions, again, of safe and supportive housing, and so that we, even as New Yorkers, can't turn away from things seemingly happening elsewhere.
There's a hand up, I think, in the back, but I can't see. If you had your hand up, if you could go
Neil,
ahead and, yes, please.
Go ahead, Neil.
I'm curious to know, I haven't yet seen the exhibition, but it sounds incredible. But I didn't hear you yet say two things, and I'm curious if you even considered it. Homes without walls, in other words, homeless people. And the other one is even, for me, more interesting. People, especially women who live in
I know you said you try not to fix the walls so as to no pun intended, but there must have been some guidelines.
Yeah. The question was on homelessness and the unhoused and domestic abuse. Well, certainly we did include the unhoused and with Geraldine Shuckwitz's work. In terms of domestic abuse,
Thinking about the long history, right, of the ways that photographs have been so important as a tool of activism. Again, so many of our artists have done that in the show, like Sarah Bennett, who has worked with formerly incarcerated women. Certainly many who've experienced abuse both inside and outside of prison walls. It felt really important to us, again, thinking curatorially and ethically about what works we would include. There was some work submitted to us, or work that we were considering in some of the series that you see that did feature women, not only women, not women and non-binary folks, right, who more visibly have signs of experiencing some sort of intimate partner violence and trauma. However, given the nature, not of not wanting to show that work, but even the relationship with the photographer to making that work and their own comfort, and not necessarily knowing that they would have the consent of the folks to show that work in this particular context, right, in a very artful exhibit, versus, right, in an op-ed or some other space, we actually chose not to include that work. That being said, a lot of it might be in the subtleties of the writing and people might miss that. We certainly don't want to only portray images of happy families and happy homes. And I think when you look at the images in the show as a whole and see kind of between the lines of the writing as well, right, that those narratives do surface. And we do hope we did justice, again, to both the beauties as well as the real danger and pain of intimacy in these works and in these communities.
Brian?
Given the very public and even political issues that you're dealing with in the show, is there a public component to the exhibition?
I suppose if there is, it would have been the open call and yeah, and there are ongoing public programs that are scheduled. There's one currently under kind of development on home and housing, specifically housing in the city. There's well, do you want to?
Oh, in June,
Yeah.
June 8th at the museum, there's a panel in particular called Documenting Intimacy, where some of the emerging artists, especially ones who have taken, right, some of the most raw photographs of themselves in their communities, such as work by Dean Majd and Layla Emery Stevens. They'll be speaking on a panel, but beyond the kind of public-facing moments like we're doing now, we're talking kind of at you and not with you. It's really important for us to have different kinds of community collaborative moments. So the different, there's some of the photographers who are doing workshops with teens enrolled in the REACH program that MCNY does with high school youth. Several week-long workshops around participatory photo making, and hopefully there'll be some that are more open to community members, professional as well as amateur and burgeoning hobby photographers, to think through not just image making, but again the ethics of why and how we take photos. That
and
we
then
do.
in June, we're working on a public program with several of the photographers on immigration and the Latinate experience in New York.
But it doesn't spill outside of the confines in the museum, and we had discussions about that. I think it would have been an interesting idea. This is the first triennial, and it seems like it was more of a sort of capacity constraint issue, but I think maybe down the road would be an exciting thing to do.
Things to build on, for sure.
For sure. I think we have time for one or two more if there are others. And if not, I actually have one more for you. You mentioned the difficulty or some of the cliches that you were seeing around photography and COVID, and it seems like, especially when you're talking about New York City and home over the past 3 years, it's a huge topic, the way that COVID exposed inequity in the city, exposed the way that the challenge was felt more deeply in some communities than others, and the way that, as you say, home became a trap for so many rather than a haven. And I wonder whether it seems to me as though artists are still grappling with that in the same way that we did some projects on 9/11, and it felt like it took years for image makers to make sense of how to talk about this in a way that didn't feel like it was just duplicating what we all know it looked like, but how to make sense of this and how to digest it. And I'm wondering if you felt like most of the work you saw was kind of unbaked in that way, and that maybe that's something that, years down the road, there will be more reflective or more interesting work, or whether you really did see a lot of work, you just didn't want to put too much of it in the show.
I feel like there was a lot of the work itself was made, but maybe the editing and the kind of the way the artists wanted to talk about it or examine it wasn't always finished. But I feel, I don't know, I bet you if we did it again, if we were looking at this stuff again, maybe even now, a year later, it might be more considered or thought out.
I mean, one thing I'm thinking about, I think, so many of these images that I'm really I'm happy about all of the work in the show, but you have your favorites. For me, some of the images that touched me the most, and I was so excited that we were able to get into the show, are ones that are documenting intimacy, right? These small moments. And again, if we think about basic constraints, if we are stuck inside, or if you just had your pod, right, who better to photograph than yourself and those who you actually were able to build trust with, right? And so many of these images, even if I think a lot of them were actually made during the years of COVID, right, reflect that, right? Like who we were able to trust, who we weren't. Another part of it too is the estrangement on the flip side. And in particular, the estrangement for, I'm thinking of photo students and other art students from each other, and that necessary community of crits and conversation that happen when everything moves on Zoom and online. I know for me and my students, I love seeing them and seeing them on Zoom, but it's so hard if someone's making large format sculptural work to say anything on a box this big, right? So I think that will continue to impact younger artists, whether or not they are in school, but especially if they are, right? What was lost in that sociality of being with one another, trying things out, having these conversations, and the work that can be made from that process, or even having access to things like dark rooms, medium format cameras, right? Things from school spaces that you may not. So yeah, I think that definitely impacted what was available or not available for the show.
So again, the exhibition is up through the summer.
Through the end of August.
Through the end of August, but if you're here just for AIPAD, make sure to see it. Is the museum open on Mondays or no?
Open on Mondays.
Okay, open on Mondays. There's your chance. And again, I think one of the big curatorial moves and one of the exciting things about the exhibition is that it contains so many artists who will be new to so many. If folks are going to be going sometime soon, are there people who you especially want to point them to? You may not want to do favorites, but particularly those folks who they may not have heard before. Things to look out for.
Well, you're asking to choose babies.
They think you should look at all of the work in the show equally, and it's all great. That's fine too.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank
thanks
you
for making
being
time.
here.
That wasn't a softball.